You're in the middle of a heated exchange. Your pulse quickens, your mind races, and every word feels like a jab in a duel. You're not listening, you're just waiting to strike back with something sharper. But so is the other person. Neither side is really hearing the other. In this tension, imagine someone leans in and quietly says, "You've already lost." It stops you cold. How could that be? You're standing your ground. You're defending yourself. You're not giving in. But maybe that's the point, the moment you step into that kind of battle, where the goal is to win, dominate, or prove you're right, you surrender something much deeper. Your composure, your control. That whisper wasn't meant to shame you, it was meant to wake you up. Because true power, according to Nietzsche, isn't about reacting. It's about not needing to. Nietzsche's idea of power defies what most people believe. Many associate power with being right, being louder, or walking away as the perceived winner of an argument. But Nietzsche saw all of that as noise, as desperate flailing to assert ego. He believed that real power wasn't in how well you could argue. It was in how little you needed to. Why do people argue, really? Beneath the surface of words and facts are emotional undercurrents. People argue because their identity feels threatened. Being wrong feels like losing a part of themselves, so the mind resists at all costs. Sometimes the argument isn't even about truth, it's about validation. People want to appear strong, confident, smart. They fight for approval more than understanding. Nietzsche recognized this and called it weakness disguised as strength. The more reactive someone is, the more controlled they are. This is where Nietzsche's concept of the will to power comes in. It's often misunderstood as brute dominance, but he meant something deeper, the ability to shape reality by mastering one's self. And no figure in his philosophy embodies this better than the Ubermensch, the overman or superior individual. The Ubermensch doesn't waste energy proving points or reacting to every provocation. He's not pulled by emotion. He chooses when to speak and when to remain silent. That silence isn't passive. It's deliberate. It commands the room, sets the tone, and shifts the power dynamic without saying a word. When he does speak, it's intentional, and that makes it powerful. Picture a meeting. Two people are going back and forth, raising voices, trying to win. One of them stays quiet, composed, observing, and when they finally speak, the room shifts. That moment holds more weight than anything said before it. Who really won the room? Not the one who fought hardest, but the one who remained in control. Silence, when used with purpose, becomes more than the absence of speech. It becomes a mirror. It reflects the other person's insecurity, forcing them to reveal more than they intended. It builds tension, and tension is influence. It makes others uncomfortable and makes them question themselves, and in that discomfort, power silently changes hands. Nietzsche's philosophy reminds us, the strongest person in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one who isn't emotionally manipulated, who doesn't need to win a petty battle because they've already mastered the field. That kind of power, the kind rooted in restraint, isn't just strength, it's supremacy. True power rarely announces itself with shouting or frantic gestures. It moves quietly, strategically, and with precision. Throughout history, a few rare individuals have mastered this kind of power, one that doesn't rely on brute strength or endless argument, but on subtle influence and inner control. Among them, Socrates, Steve Jobs, and Miyamoto Musashi. Each of them, in their own realm, embodied the quiet strength of restraint. They didn't fight to prove they were right. They made others see truth for themselves, or lose control in the process. Socrates never raised his voice in debate. He didn't crush his opponents with aggression. Instead, he mastered the art of questioning. When a self-assured politician claimed to be wise, Socrates simply asked him, "What is wisdom?" The man responded confidently, but Socrates kept pressing, gently unraveling his definition with more questions. Eventually, the man realized he couldn't clearly define what he claimed to possess. Socrates didn't call him a fool. He didn't need to. The The man arrived at that conclusion on his own. Socrates understood something powerful. People resist being told they're wrong, but they'll accept the truth when they discover it themselves. His silence wasn't weakness, it was a strategy. He let others expose their own errors, while he stayed calm, composed, and quietly in control. Steve Jobs also understood this dynamic, but in a different setting, the high-stakes world of innovation and business. He didn't waste his energy fighting over every small detail. His strength lay in knowing when a battle was worth it. When the iPhone was in development, Jobs faced internal resistance. His engineers wanted physical buttons. He envisioned a seamless touchscreen. Instead of shutting them down, he let them argue. He listened, he guided, he shaped the conversation until the idea became theirs, not just his. The result? A revolutionary device that redefined an entire industry. Jobs wasn't afraid of conflict, but he used it like a tool. He didn't argue to dominate, he argued to transform. His words were always aimed at impact, not ego. If a conversation didn't move the vision forward, he simply didn't engage. And then there was Miyamoto Musashi, the undefeated samurai who turned silence and patience into weapons. He fought over 60 duels and never lost, not just because of skill with the sword, but because he understood the human mind. Against the legendary Sasaki Kojiro, Musashi used time itself as a tactic. He showed up hours late, driving Kojiro into a rage. When the duel finally began, Kojiro was already off balance mentally, emotionally, physically. Musashi struck decisively. The fight was over almost before it began. He didn't win because he was stronger. He won because he had already taken control before a single blow was struck. He knew, if your opponent is angry, they are vulnerable. Emotion clouds judgment, and whoever controls emotion controls the outcome. What binds these three men across centuries and cultures is their understanding of silent power. None of them wasted time in reaction. They didn't chase victory, they created it. They didn't dominate through force, they dominated through influence. They knew that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. True power is calm, patient, and strategic. So the next time you're pulled into conflict, ask yourself, are you reacting or are you controlling the situation? Are you trying to win an argument or are you guiding others toward truth? Socrates, Jobs, and Musashi didn't speak to be heard. They spoke when it mattered. They waited when it didn't. And in doing so, they rewrote the rules of power, because in the end, the strongest move is often no move at all. True power is silent. Why do we argue? Not for truth, as we often claim, but for control. Most arguments aren't about discovering what's right. They're about proving we're right. They're fueled not by logic, but by emotion, identity, and ego. And the more we engage in them, the more we give away our power. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this better than most. His concept of the will to power wasn't about brute strength or dominating others. It was about mastering yourself so completely that others fall under your influence without realizing it. He envisioned the Ubermensch, not as someone who shouts to be heard, but as someone who chooses when and whether to speak at all. The true mark of strength, Nietzsche argued, is restraint, and modern psychology confirms what he sensed long ago. Most arguments are traps. They expose not truth, but weakness. Cognitive science gives us the first clue. Our brains are wired not for clarity, but for victory. When we argue, we're not trying to learn, we're trying to win. We cling to our beliefs through confirmation bias, ignoring anything that contradicts what we already believe. When challenged, we don't soften. We double down. This is the backfire effect. And then there's the Dunning-Kruger effect. The less we know, the more certain we feel. These mental biases make honest debate nearly impossible. Most people aren't listening, they're waiting to speak. The Ubermensch, by contrast, listens to understand, not to respond. He doesn't jump in. He decides whether the conversation is even worth his time. Then there's the emotional side of conflict. Arguments often feel like personal attacks. Why? Because the topics we argue most passionately about, politics, religion, identity, are deeply tied to how we see ourselves. So when someone challenges our beliefs, it doesn't just feel like they're disagreeing with us, it feels like they're attacking us. That's why debates quickly turn ugly, not because of logic, but because of emotional triggers. The powerful individual doesn't fall for this. He doesn't let others decide how he feels. He doesn't react. He chooses. Beneath it all lies ego. Most arguments aren't about ideas, they're about validation. People argue to be seen as smart, righteous, or superior. They want to win, not just to be correct, but to be admired. This craving for approval makes people predictable and easily manipulated. But the Ubermensch is different. He doesn't need applause. He doesn't need to prove anything. He creates his own truth and lets his actions speak. That's why the most powerful figures in history didn't waste time defending themselves. They didn't argue with critics. They focused on vision, remained disciplined, and let the world catch up. Modern research echoes this. True influence is silent and intentional. In any group, the most powerful people aren't the loudest. They're the ones who guide the flow of conversation without force. They speak little, but with impact. People lean in when they talk. They don't interrupt. They don't overshare. Their authority is felt before they say a word. Behavioral psychology adds another layer. Calmness is seen as confidence. When we stay composed in a heated moment, others instinctively trust us more. Emotional outbursts weaken our credibility. Nietzsche's ideal, the person of supreme self-mastery, understood this. Control your reactions and you control the dynamic. So what's the lesson? If someone insults you and you react, you've already lost. If you rush to defend yourself just to prove you're right, you've handed over your power. But if you stay composed, respond only when it serves your goal, and remain unmoved by provocation, you've already won. True strength isn't about speaking louder. It's about knowing when silence says more. Most people think silence means weakness. They assume that if you don't speak up in an argument, you're surrendering. But Friedrich Nietzsche saw things differently. To him, silence wasn't passive, it was powerful. But not all silence is strength, and not all conflict should be avoided. True mastery lies in knowing when to speak, when to hold back, and most importantly, why you're doing either. You see, Nietzsche's philosophy was never about hiding from conflict. It was about approaching it with intention. Ask yourself the hard questions before you speak. Am I talking because I want to, or because I feel pressured? Am I reacting out of emotion, or choosing my words with purpose? Is this argument worth my energy, or am I just feeding my ego? That's the key. Most people argue not for truth, but for validation. They don't want to grow. They want to win. But Nietzsche's Ubermensch doesn't argue to be right. He engages only when it serves a higher goal. Silence isn't his retreat, it's his edge. The pause before he speaks makes people listen. The restraint he shows forces others to wonder what he's thinking. That's power. Still, Nietzsche never said to stay silent forever. Power is not in hiding. Power is in control. History's greatest thinkers, Socrates, Galileo, Steve Jobs, they didn't run from conflict. They used it. But they used it wisely. They spoke with precision, not to satisfy their ego, but to shape the world around them. Silence is a weapon, but like any weapon, it must be wielded with purpose. If you use it all the time, you become invisible. If you never use it, your words lose their weight. Power lies not in always speaking or never speaking, but in speaking when it matters most. That's where Nietzsche's concept of the will to power comes in. It's not about brute strength. It's about self-mastery. It's about growing through struggle, transforming discomfort into clarity, using conflict as a forge to sharpen your mind. Weak thinkers avoid challenges, strong thinkers embrace them, because a mind that's never tested remains fragile. Like a blade that's never met steel. Imagine a warrior who trains but never fights. Imagine a philosopher who studies but never questions. That's not mastery. That's fear dressed as wisdom. Nietzsche warned against that. He taught that real growth comes from tension, from wrestling with hard ideas, from confronting resistance head-on. The Ubermensch doesn't argue over petty things, but he also doesn't run from meaningful battles. He picks them strategically. The difference is this: are you arguing to prove something, or are you arguing to transform something? Most people argue just to protect their ego, but powerful people argue with intention, to refine ideas, to shift perspectives, to strengthen conviction. Think of Socrates. He didn't force his ideas onto others. He questioned. He made others collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. That's influence. So when should you engage? When the argument reveals deeper truth, when it sharpens your thinking, when it pushes someone, yourself or another, to grow, when it shifts the balance of power in your favor. And when should you stay silent? When the argument is just noise, when the other person isn't open, when it's your ego that's loud, not your purpose. When your silence says more than your words ever could. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine you only have 100 words left to speak in your life. Every sentence counts. Would you waste them arguing with someone who isn't listening? Or would you sharpen them, save them, use them like a blade before a final duel? Powerful people don't chase every battle. They watch, they learn, they calculate. And when the moment is right, they speak with precision. Or they don't speak at all, because true power doesn't scream. It doesn't beg to be heard. It commands attention in the pause. It radiates from restraint, and it shifts the room, even in silence. So the next time you're pulled into an argument, stop, breathe, observe, ask yourself, who holds the power here? The one reacting or the one choosing when to respond? Control your reaction and you control the moment. Control the moment and you shape the outcome. That's not just philosophy, that's power. And Nietzsche knew it all along.